All right, welcome everyone. My name is K. Michael Russell. I am a comic book colorist, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So, first off, you're probably noticing if you watch the channel, I have a new camera, so I'm testing it out. I don't know if I'll use it a lot, but I wanted an option. If I'm going to be doing tutorials on the iPad eventually, then you need to be able to see what's going on for gestures and things. But I thought this would be a good time to do a follow-up on the last video. There have been a ton of comments, more comments on the iPad slash Wacom video than my last 10 videos probably combined. So obviously some of you guys feel pretty strongly about it one way or the other, so I thought, okay, let's go through these comments, let's talk about it. There's a couple of things that kept coming up, things that I guess I left out that I want to cover as well and address some of these things. So, reading this on the iPad, this is how big it is. I think I actually didn't show it in the video before. I showed some screenshots and things, but anyway, it does look big compared to some of the others, but it's very thin, doesn't weigh much. Can you guys see when I'm looking at the screen versus looking at the lens? I should get used to looking at the lens. First off, there was a lot of support from people that told me welcome to the club, basically. So, yeah, thanks. So first thing I want to clarify before we get into some of the comments is the reason that I spent the first 5 minutes of the video explaining how I use it, that was on purpose. I don't have the same exact workflow that someone else does. Someone else is going to have a different workflow. For me, I've got a big monitor. I've got my standard, Intuos that I like a lot. For all the reasons I talked about before, I use that most of the time. The only time that I used my Wacom before was on the road. So, or when I'm out of the office or I want to work somewhere else. So I'm not saying the iPad Pro is always everyone's best solution, okay? That's one of the problems I think with the internet these days is the real world in just about any area, there are always shades of gray. There's nuance. Things aren't always just white or just black, just night, just day. There are degrees, there are subtleties, there are differences. Everyone is different. Nowhere in the last video did I say the iPad is the best device for all people in all cases. I didn't say that, okay? Some people heard that, but I never said it. So I want to clarify that from the start. There are things that are faster in Photoshop right now. I don't know if that'll always be the case, but even so, I'm still going to use my desktop setup. I'm still going to use Photoshop. But now that I have another tool, I have more flexibility. Okay. So first question, have someone Brian ask, any idea if the Droid tablets can be considered equivalent? I'm going to say no here. Now someone can tell me I'm wrong, but I do have, my wife has a Samsung Galaxy Tab S2, which is I think last year's model. It's pretty much, I think it's top of the line as far as Android goes until this year, and they've got the new one out. Tried playing with styluses on it, didn't really grab me at all. So I'm going to say no. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I'm sure. I had several people recommend Astropad, which basically lets you connect the iPad to a desktop Mac. One, I don't have a Mac. I have a Windows desktop, so one, I can't really test it. Two, it defeats the purpose for me of why I got this tablet. I wanted something, I don't want to have to look at the screen to get my work done when I'm sitting at my desk anyway. So in those cases, I'm going to use Photoshop on my desktop. So it's not really something that I need. I have seen some artists, Ben Bishop, I noticed, was one of their testimonials on Astropad. So he's a comic artist. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for any of us probably. So I'm sure it works. I just haven't tried it. I am intrigued by the idea, especially wireless. Like apparently it works wirelessly as well. So I'm considering trying that maybe one day, but not right now because I don't want to go buy a new Mac. I also had several people ask about keyboard shortcuts. How is it different without the shortcuts? And I think I touched on this in the last video, but maybe I didn't. If you're someone that switches tools often, lasso, brush, back and forth with certain styles, that's going to be slower on an iPad, at least right now. because, for example, using like a cut and grad method of coloring, where you're lassoing and then painting, which I've done a lot previously on the channel. I haven't done as much lately, but it is a popular style still. It's probably the most comic booky style there is. I have found it to be a little slower on the iPad because in Photoshop, you got one hand on a keyboard, so it's lasso, brush, back and forth. It's very fast, and your hand never has to leave the screen. Whereas on the iPad, you're drawing, switching tools, drawing, switch tool, lasso, switch tool to brush, So if you do a lot of cut and grad and a lot of switching back and forth, you might find it to be a little slower. Now, it's not a huge difference. Especially if you're someone that colors for fun and you're not on deadlines and things. If you're 10% slower, that's not a big deal. But when you're coloring professionally, and especially if you're like me right now, I'm juggling 2-3 books a month, that 10% is big, right? So what I found, one, is I'm not using cut and grad as much anyway. I think you'll notice if you've watched the videos on the channel lately, I've been using it less and less. But I think the last one I used it was probably the Black Cat Spider-Man. So it's not something I'm using a ton unless I'm doing like superhero-y type stuff. But because my coloring methods have evolved so much over the years and are still changing all the time, you guys that follow the channel know, I've discovered mask and adjustment layers and all these different things in the last year, and so my method of rendering has changed a lot. And I'm constantly trying new things and screwing them up, but figuring out ways to get faster and more efficient. So my point is, I'm not really married to any specific technique, and so I probably have more flexibility than a colorist, say, that's been doing it for 15 or 20 years, and they've got their method and it's set and they know what they like. This might be too big of a change. But if you're like me and you're willing to be more flexible or try something different, then what I found is I'm actually sort of bending my style and the way things are done to what the iPad Pro and Procreate is best at, which is painting and drawing and those sort of things. I mean, that's really its strength. There's a ton of flexibility in all the stuff we talked about in the last video with the pressure and the gradients and all that stuff. So my ultimate point is, keyboard shortcuts, yes, to answer your question, it might slow you down in some ways. Now, the reason why it's actually made me faster in some ways is that I'm not switching tools as often. And this is another question that I got pretty often is, how's just your workflow in general? Is it slower or faster, whatever? What I found is where on my Intuos or even on my Wacom before, I would have to make a selection if I was going to be on the edge of anything, because I'd go ground, grab the flats with the magic wand, come back to my rendering layer, and so that I can easily stay in lines rendering certain things. What I'm finding with this is there's cases where I don't need the flat selection because the pencil is so precise that I can go straight to the line I want and just start painting or coloring along the edges without feeling like I need to contain what I'm doing with the selection. So the net result of that is I'm switching layers less often. I'm switching tools less often. So overall, I really haven't noticed I know I haven't noticed a drop in speed. If anything, I may have sped up in some ways. I haven't actually timed myself because every page is different, but that should give you some idea. I haven't had this thing long enough to perfect every single aspect of it. I'm still learning with this as much as you guys might be learning from this channel in some ways. But I'm encouraged that this early I've hit the ground running. I colored 2 pages of postal in the airport yesterday, waiting on a plane, in about an hour and a half, did 2 pages of postal. So, it works. So, someone else asked, I heard you can use the iPad Pro as a Cintiq, so you can use Photoshop on the iPad Pro. Again, I'm intrigued by this. You have to have a Mac for that functionality. So, People like it. The people have commented below that, answering this person already, saying that Astropad works well. So give it a shot. Chase says, "Wow, did not expect this. How is it for flatting?" I had to, again, sort of adjust flatting methods a little bit here. The lasso, by default, anti-aliases, which is not good, okay? So, not for flatting, anyway. So, to fix that, what I did is I created a brush in Procreate that is a perfect square with hard edges. And I traced, with the little flatting that I've done on it, I traced the edge with that brush and then fill it with the color drop. It's the same ultimate result. And I actually learned that from a gentleman named David Arroyo, who has a YouTube channel also. He does tutorials on Procreate, so be sure to check him out. And I thought I made this clear in the video, but you know, maybe they skipped ahead or something, or they skipped a part. Is it as good as a Cintiq? I think it's better. I'm going to get to why and how it's better in a little bit. But overall, it's smoother. It feels smoother and faster and sharper and more accurate to me in every way. So, and I'm not new to digital tablets. Like, I had someone else said, "Oh, you just haven't blah blah." I've been coloring on digital tablets since 2003. I've tried almost every brand and every program that there is at some point. I still say this is the best drawing experience I've ever had. So, throwing that out there. I did have several people agree with the ergonomic issues. If you missed the last video, I basically talked about how posture is tough for me on a tablet. You have to, like on a digital display style tablet like a Cintiq. I've gotten around that on this by like just sitting in my recliner and using a pillow, which I can't do on a MobileStudio Pro. Not comfortably, anyway. Philip says, "Wow, it sounds like you're really surprised with the results." Yes. What are all the tools you'd recommend for comic book coloring to somebody brand new looking to start from scratch? And I told Philip, I actually commented and told him I didn't have an answer for him yet and to let me stew a little bit on this. And I'm still not sure about the answer. Honestly, you know, a low-end iPad Pro and $30 worth of apps, that might be the simplest, most inexpensive way to get started, unless you go with like a lower end computer, like a laptop, just a cheap laptop, and maybe just a standard drawing tablet. I don't know if there's a right answer. It's total personal preference. Again, going back to my discussion about nuance and degrees, I know we don't like that on the internet. We like things to be one way or the other. But your personal preferences have a lot to do with that. So for a beginner, you can't go wrong, obviously, with an iPad Pro and Procreate and Apple Pencil. Like I obviously like that combo a lot. If that's more than you want to spend to start off with, go get a cheapo laptop. Doesn't really matter. Hook up a inexpensive regular digital tablet. Either way works. I mean, there's not going to be a right or wrong answer there. Give me 6 months with this, and then maybe I'll have changed my mind or have a decision. But at this point, the tools don't matter as much as what you prefer. Some people, and this is another thing I'll get to, some people don't like the way it feels. You know, just it's a glass screen, so they say it feels too slick, or they especially people that are used to drawing traditionally, you're used to that, texture of paper. And in the Wacom tablets do have a little bit of texture to them. I mean, it's very, very subtle, but there's a little bit of resistance when you're drawing and painting and things. And there's not much resistance on this. There's none at all, really. It's very smooth. But even having drawn on Wacom tablets for as long as I have, I immediately hit the ground running with this. I didn't really notice anything. I mean, I noticed it was different, but I didn't notice it enough for it to be a problem, if that makes sense. I had several people say they had a very similar experience than me, so I'm glad you guys enjoyed the video. I had several people recommending different applications. I'm not really trying other things right now. I'm in the middle of several deadlines, and I just need to get some work done. So I'm sure I'll be experimenting with some of these other software programs, but yeah, I don't know. Most of this stuff I haven't used. I really only used Procreate and a little bit of Paintstorm and a little bit of Affinity Photo. I'll cover all that stuff later. I sort of touched on this earlier, but Hillary asked, several of your videos show cut and grad. Have you found an efficient way to do that in Procreate? A gradient tool was the main thing I was hoping for, but didn't get in the last version. Gradient brushes don't quite do the trick. Actually, when I do cut and grad, I don't really use gradients anymore. I just get a big soft brush and let that act as the gradient, if that makes sense. You get it big enough, you get a brush big enough, and that soft edge is basically a gradient. But like I said earlier, cut and grad is one of the styles that I haven't quite got a great workflow for yet, because when you want to add a selection, which is something you do a lot, in Photoshop you just hold shift and you add a selection. Well, in Procreate it's select, click the plus sign, select, click the plus sign. So it's, again, it's possible, it's not quite as smooth, snappy. But again, I've got around that by I'm not doing it very much. So I'm basically doing more of a painting type style. Someone asked, what about Affinity Photo? It seems to have a lot of features. It seems to be a pretty good Photoshop alternative, especially for photo editors. I haven't tried painting with it yet. I have no idea what that's like. The only thing I've used it for is exporting CMYK files, because Procreate won't export CMYK. So I'm saving it as an RGB PSD file, opening it in Affinity Photo, and then creating the exported high-res TIFF file in CMYK there. That's one thing that I want to look into more, because I was thinking I had to do it one page at a time, which in Photoshop I have a batch process. So I can open 10 pages and say, make CMYK files. It flattens them, converts them to CMYK, exports it to a certain folder, and ignores, and then just closes the PSD file without saving it. So I can do a whole issue just in a couple of clicks. I've read that Affinity Photo has batch processing, but I haven't dug into it yet to know if it can do all that. If it does, then that'll be great. But that's the only thing I'm really using Affinity Photo for at the moment. It does seem to be a very full-featured program in general. So that's all I can tell you right now. This person's asking about battery life, and that's the thing that I've been really impressed with is, my Wacom, I'd be lucky maybe to get 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 out of it, like light use. Doing anything serious, drawing for any serious amount of time, I don't even know if I could get that much. I usually just kept it plugged in because I didn't really trust the battery indicator on that. But the battery life has been crazy. I mean, I haven't measured the amount of time or anything, but it's at least double that. I would say 6 or 8 hours, pretty heavy use, but I don't know. It's a lot. It seems like a lot. On standby, it's incredible to me. Like, if you just put it down with the screen, I pulled it off my charger one night and sat down to do some drawing, and I got tired and didn't use it. I just set it next to the recliner and it sat there all night. I woke up in the morning and it was at 100% still. Like, without being plugged in anything, the standby on this thing is incredible. Standby just means you're not using it. So it's not as important, obviously, but if you forget to charge it or something overnight, it's not the end of the world. You're probably going to be able to get a lot done. Aftermath Art and Design says, I can't tell you how shocked I was to see this video show up today. You're one of my favorite YouTube artists. Thank you. But I've always been disappointed about your feelings on the iPad Pros. I didn't know what I was talking about, apparently. I've learned so much from your techniques, but I don't use Photoshop. I've been on Procreate almost exclusively for over a year. I've always been curious to see how your techniques and style would translate. I'm looking forward to some of your videos. Welcome to the club. Yeah, another one of you. Yes. So yes, videos will be coming eventually. Like I said, right now I've got too much work to slow down and really dig into making videos on it. So until doing videos on Photoshop, I will probably can always do videos on Photoshop. But I might start mixing in new stuff. Robert says, the iPad Pro was not my focus because some reviews were describing exporting files as a pain in the neck. This is my biggest concern. How do you get your pictures from Procreate to my PC? I am doing it all wirelessly through Dropbox. I have fast internet at home. It's 125 megabits, which is pretty fast. The uploads, I think 10 megabits, which is also pretty fast. I don't really notice it taking a whole lot of time. I mean, so basically if I might set up a page in Photoshop, save it, like I work out of my Dropbox folder, and so it always has all of my current work backed up all the time. So by the time I save it, it uploads after a few minutes. I sit down, I can download it onto the iPad. It works for me. I mean, you can also just connect it, I think, and transfer files, but I really haven't done that yet. Everything that I've transferred so far has been through Dropbox. Grenader says, I don't like how the Apple Pencil feels. The screen is too plastic and the pen is not as responsive. Cintiq is better. You're entitled to your opinion. I want to talk a little bit about the speed, because I had someone else tell me that I was a crazy person, in different words, for saying that this could outperform like a Wacom MobileStudio Pro with an i7 and all the gigabits of RAM and blah, blah, blah. Because in the last video, I talked about it feeling faster and smoother, and I mentioned it earlier. I was curious about why that seemed to, how that could be possible, given the fact that this is still a mobile OS. And I did some research today. I want to show you why it feels smoother. So when I say the iPad Pro is faster than my i5 whatever processor and all this stuff, I obviously don't mean, we're not talking about pure horsepower. Like I can't edit, well, I don't think I can edit like 4K massive videos, you know, that are hours and hours long on an iPad. There's some things that obviously an iPad is not suited for. When I talk about the drawing experience, like the actual drawing itself being faster, there are technical reasons why it is. And I'm going to try to explain this with some pictures here. So let's say that this is just a timeline. Okay, we're going across through time here, and this is going to be let's say this is the Wacom. All right, and here's the iPad. Now, a Wacom MobileStudio Pro at best is going to have a refresh rate of about 60 hertz. So we're talking about, I think that's 60 frames per second. So let's say we've got a frame here, and a frame here, and a frame here. So we're passing through time, and this is every time that the screen will refresh. Okay? Now this is very condensed. We're looking at milliseconds here, right? But let's say this is a frame, here's a frame, here's a frame. Now, the iPad can boost the refresh rate on certain applications at certain times, which Procreate is one, up to 120 hertz. So that's double, okay? So the distance between the frames, is what I'm going to call it, to steal a term from like movies, is going to be half that, okay? So we're going to have one here, have a frame here, here, and here. Now, if I start drawing, if I put down a stroke, and let's say I start right here. So look at how much time has to pass before that stroke shows up. Okay, we're talking about this right here. I'm going to do this a different color so you guys can see. So this is my distance. That little bit of lag there is the difference in the refresh rate. Okay. Now on the iPad, if I touch the screen at the same time and start drawing, you can see that I'm much closer to the next frame because it's putting down frames twice as often. And so you could do this at any stage, you know. Now, if I happen to start a stroke here, then I've got a very small distance here, and it would be the same, say, on both of those. But if I start my stroke right after the frame releases, then again, I've got to wait that entire time until the next frame. When you're getting twice as much information, that's what makes it faster. So yes, horsepower-wise, an i7 processor can do more work. But think about it this way. If the Wacom is a Ferrari with a V12 800 horsepower engine, and then I take another Ferrari right next to it that looks just like it, same engine and everything, let's even say. But one of them has brand new tires and the other tires are bald. Okay? That one with the brand new tires is going to hit the road immediately. Bam, you know? But if my tires have to spin up for a second before I get any traction, it's going to take a second. That's the simplest way I know how to describe what's happening here. Now, like I said, we're not sitting around waiting. I mean, obviously, we're talking about a very, very slight difference here, but we are talking about double the frame rate, okay? So it feels significant, okay? It feels like a big difference. So that's where that smoothness in the use of this comes from. It's not in the raw gigahertz that the whatever processor can put out. It's how fast you're actually seeing those changes. So I hope that makes sense. I've probably said some technicality wrong in here, and I'm sure someone will correct me on it, so feel free. Michael says, the iPad Pro is more comfortable to work with. I still use my Wacom more because of the software that I'm used to and the file system on a computer OS. You know, again, obviously, it's not a perfect use case for every single scenario. Do I still do all of my file management and keeping everything straight on a PC? Yes. But for me, I'm only using this part of the time because I'm still very used to Windows and doing some things, and so it hasn't replaced my desktop yet, and probably never will. The other thing I want to say about this is the file system on iOS 11, which just came out, is much improved over previous versions of iOS that I've used. You know, at any time you can swipe up from the bottom and get all the programs that you work with. So it's much faster at multitasking. It doesn't feel like, oh, I can only have one open app at a time. It also is pretty good. I've even done the split screen thing where I open reference on one side of it and have Procreate on the other, and even on the iPad, still have plenty of room to get both done. So if you're basing how the file system works on iOS based on something from before iOS 11, you might want to play around with it and give it a shot, because I've been very impressed with it. William says, just got one for myself, and I've had many of the same thoughts, just in terms of how it snuck up on me and how much I like the experience of creating art on it. I have not had a Wacom tablet though. I have looked at them over the years. This and videos like it is great information that I'm on the right path in terms of tools. Absolutely. I mean, if you're digging it, awesome. If you don't like it, go back to what you're using. Not going to hurt my feelings. Mike says, I've been making 600 PPI 10 by 15 originals in Procreate and Astropad Studio for a couple of years now. It's so great. So yeah, he's making huge files on it, which again, I'm impressed with that. So I think that covers all the main comments. There were a lot more comments, but I'll say most of them are saying the same thing. Thank you to everybody that, you know, said welcome to the club. There have only been a handful of comments that I would say were, not even rude, but just very modern, like insta dislike. Bet you're fun at parties. So again, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this new format, I don't know, might do it more. So hope you guys don't mind me switching things up for a video, kind of playing around with some new toys here. So subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.